Welcome to What You Need to Know for Audio Engineers. This video we're talking about EQ. And EQ is one of the tools that we use as an engineer to basically fix problems when they arise. And it's important to know how to use a tool before you're going to use it, so we're going to talk about that here. EQ, or equalization, refers to the frequency spectrum, the audible frequency spectrum for human beings. That spectrum is anywhere from 20 to 20,000 hertz, give or take. Since it's such a wide spectrum, relatively for human beings' perception anyway, we typically break up this frequency range into different bands of frequencies or groups of frequencies. Most typically we'll see the treble frequencies, the middle frequencies, and the bass frequencies. Different instruments will occupy different groups of frequencies more prominently than others. So let's take the bass guitar, for example. The bass guitar, it's a bass instrument, so we're probably going to expect that it occupies the bass frequencies more than, say, a guitar or a synthesizer or something like that. And then we have instruments like the piano and keys instruments in general, which have a very wide frequency range, and they can have prominences in all of the bands of the audio spectrum. So different instruments fit into different areas of the audio spectrum. When we say that a sound source has more prominence in a certain band of frequencies, treble, middle, or bass, then what we're really talking about is that that band of frequencies for that instrument has a higher dB level. When we're talking about dB for gain, that's an average dB, an average across the audio spectrum. But each individual band in the spectrum has its own dB rating, or level of loudness, measured in decibels. So if we have a vocal, for instance, that is sounding really muddy in the mix and doesn't have a whole lot of clarity, we'll probably take those bass frequencies and roll them off. We will reduce the volume of those bass frequencies in that voice, and that will equate to more clarity or more directness in the sound of that vocal, or it will contribute to it anyway. If we increase the bass, the decibels of the bass frequencies in a voice, it's going to lose clarity. It's going to sound kind of muffled, and it's going to sound, well, pretty ugly. Just straight up, it's going to sound bad to increase the bass in somebody's voice. But there are other instruments that we might want to increase the bass in, like the bass drum, for instance. So we can accentuate frequency bands by increasing the dB of that particular band of frequencies, depending on the instrument. We can also accentuate frequencies by removing the other bands of frequencies. So let's go back to that vocal example again. Remember, what did we say? We say we reduced the bass in the voice and it increased the clarity of the vocal. What essentially happened, we reduced the bass frequencies, we reduced them in that vocal, and that accentuated the treble and the mid frequencies in that vocal as well. So reducing a band of frequencies in a sound source will accentuate the other frequencies which we do not cut. And it's similar to boosting. Some people prefer to boost frequencies to accentuate them. Some people prefer to cut frequencies to accentuate other frequencies. So a number of problems can arise with EQ. The first problem is we don't know how to use an EQ. And so anything that we do with the EQ is going to be misguided, and we're going to be potentially ruining the sound of our mix if we don't know how to use it. So the solution to this first problem of I don't know how to use an EQ, the solution is don't use an EQ. Learn how to use it first, practice with it on your own time, and then come to rehearsal with a little bit of practice and knowledge in your head, and start to apply what you've learned during rehearsal. So there's the first issue that we can run into. Another issue that we can run into is related to gain. Again, remember in the last video, in gain, we talked about if the gain is too high, we start to hear feedback. If the sound source is not loud enough, if we're not getting enough volume from the sound source, a singer, for instance, we're going to hear a certain frequency start to feed back. The decibels of those frequencies are louder than all of the other frequencies of that that are being produced by that sound source. It's feeding back because when we boost the gain, it boosts all of the frequencies, including that one frequency which is louder than all of the others. So that one frequency, which is louder than all the others, is the first one to start feeding back. So when we're dealing with feedback, we can not only reduce the gain at the preamp, but we can also find that particular frequency or those particular frequencies which are feeding back, use the EQ and reduce the decibels of those certain frequencies to remove them, to equalize them with the rest of the frequencies coming from that sound source. We equalize them all together, and then we can boost the gain up and down, and we can get more headroom out of our preamp. Another problem that we can run into with EQ is trying to do too much with it. Say we have a guitar player, and maybe this guitar player doesn't have a great tone. We might instinctually try to go in with EQ and try and carve out frequencies, try and boost frequencies, try and fix their tone for them. And that's not really possible. The best way to fix that guitar player's sound is to get on the talkback mic and communicate with them and say, hey, what other sounds do you have? Can we figure something out? Are you using a Fender amp model? Are you using a Vox amp model? Try a Marshall, see if that works. So communicate with your musicians to get a better sound from the source. We don't want to use EQ to fix bad tone from our instrumentalists. We use it to fix problems. We use it to equalize the frequency band, the bands of frequencies in particular sources, so that we avoid feedback, so that we avoid issues with acoustics in the room, all of these different things. We don't use it as a tone shaper. That, in my opinion, is a bad way to use EQ and can cause more problems than it can solve. So here's a look at the EQ on our soundboard here. So across the top right here, we can see, we can select the frequency to boost or cut. So let me just take this one right here. I can boost it. It's at 2.5 kilohertz right here. I can boost it. We can cut it. We can change what frequency we are boosting or cutting, moving it around. So going down to 1K here. This middle value right here is basically how wide of a frequency range we are boosting or cutting. So I can take a very narrow band of frequencies, or we can make a really wide band of frequencies right here. Another way of doing EQ is through filters. So we can bring a high pass filter in here, and a high pass filter cuts low frequencies. So it lets high frequencies pass. It lets the high frequency signal pass through, and it cuts the low frequencies. Low pass filter does the opposite. It passes the low frequencies and cuts the high frequencies. We can see that we're setting these to a certain frequency, and it will cut all of the frequencies above that frequency according to this curve right here. So here's our vocal EQ right here. We can see that we've cut some low end, and there's this mid-range cut right here. Let's take a look at another vocal channel right there. Looks very similar. Here's another one. These are all vocal channels right here. We can see that same mid-range frequency is cut in each of these microphones, plus a little bit extra depending on the vocalist. But the reason that we see this consistency, and we can even look at a guitar, the electric guitar there, here's an acoustic guitar, we can see very similar cuts. Even the bass guitar right here has some cuts in that range as well. The reason that we see these cuts in this area is not because of the individual instruments themselves. It's because of the cumulative EQ and the acoustics of the room. Rooms have more prominent frequencies as well. So let's say we can take a look at maybe our room has a frequency range that looks like this. This is what our room sounds like. We've got this big boost of frequencies here in the lower mid-range right here, around somewhere around 300 hertz.
So to fix that, or to equalize the sound of our room, the acoustics of our room, to compensate for it, we have to cut those frequencies out of basically all of our instruments. And if we don't, then we're going to have this kind of bump in the sound of the band. In other words, the sound of the band is going to sound unbalanced. It's going to sound bad because it's got this big hump in it. So we use EQ to fix problems like this. And when we apply all of those EQs to all of the instruments, then it takes this hump right here and it kind of equalizes it out a little bit like that.